I'm going to ask a question so the online participant, can they see the slides?
Online folks can see and hear now.
Good, yeah, so they can see the questions. So if you're online, you can ask questions on the spreadsheet directly. So I've got the 5 questions on the spreadsheet called panel, and you can just put the number of the question and what your comment or question is. So I want volunteers for the first question. Doesn't have to be answered, but we can just sit there, try to answer it, and maybe have a discussion with the people in the room. So Paul is going to come in. He's just finishing a message. Yeah. And then there will be 2 more. So the question says, what are the unmet linguistics and educational needs of Celtic languages speakers, and how might digital languages technologies address? So when I created the question, I had people in mind. Like, for example, Inga was one of those for this one. Okay, and I thought, it'll be good to see. I have to do this now if people are not going to move in. And then the other one was Gruff, because all the language resources you created for Welsh, so it'll be good to see how that works. So I think that will, finish your cake first, that's fine. No rush. There's a chair missing. Right? Yeah. No, it's all right, not your fault. Yeah, so you can start that way then, Paul.
How might digital language technologies address these needs? So pretty much everything we've been talking about all day. Creating the resources, which then as a secondary step, like we have done in Corkenc, and Dawn can come up and answer that question as well, like we have done in Corkenc, feeding into language teaching, language learning resources and materials would be the obvious steps, but also language technologies. So as people have been saying all day with predictive text or, grammar checkers or whatever, that would be the obvious next 2 steps.
Good. So the question I've been thinking about all day was, we had this really nice presentation by David and talked about all the resources that have been created for Scottish Gaelic. And then Inga came in and said, people are not using the language despite some of the resources. They have the platform available and they're still speaking in English, for example.
It's a really interesting thing because actually when I started digging around some of the resources that are available, there are more resources available for Gaelic than even I was aware of. So there's, for example, Firefox in Gaelic. And then the person that makes this, it's Michael Bauer. Some of you might know it, he did he took the Gaelic 1903 dictionary and turned it into a digital tool that is amazing and has got all the words digitized from, and what he discussed some of this, and it was really interesting because he said basically it's too much effort for people they don't know about it. They find it easier to use in English, which is a barrier. It's what I said, sort of this, I don't know. I don't want to say people are lazy, but they go for the easy option if it's there in English, and they have to manually turn it into Gaelic. So some people don't even know Firefox. They don't know even how to install the Gaelic version of Firefox. So they're kind of at a loss from the start. And it's kind of and he said you can see when the Gaelic College on Skye is on holiday, because then the number of people using Firefox in Gaelic drops off a cliff to 0. And it's kind of quite been an interesting thing. So I think it's kind of knowing what's out there, and I'm kind of quite jealous for some, we always look at Wales, what they have got, and sort of this coherent thing. And I was kind of speaking about the Gaelic Google Translate. It's really reasonably good from Gaelic to English. It kind of, you can make it make sense, but it's not quite so good from English to Gaelic. And one of the problems is that people still use it. So I know that my son, when he was at primary school, they came out and had this lovely text, and he handed it to me, and he said, "Read this, Mum." And I was, "Great, what is this?" He went, "Gaelic." And I'm like, "Really?" It's Gaelic, Jim, but not as we know it. And it was kind of, there is a bit, because it's sort of, they don't have the knowledge about yet developed language skills to know what is not right. So for them, this was just, the computer says it's correct Gaelic, so for us it's correct Gaelic. So there is a bit around how do we use these tools effectively, how can we make it better? And I think...
Do you think there's an over-trust in tools?
Yeah, I think the younger generation, they were young, they were primary school children at that age, so I suppose you can't, you know, judge them on their digital web. But they had sussed that Google Translate exists in Gaelic, so they were quite excited by this, and everything is Google translated because that is the solution to everything. So I'm kind of quite intrigued when ChatGPT comes into Gaelic, how that's going to.
Well, that's the thing. I was going to say, I mean, it's just going to get worse, isn't it? We need to train people how to critically look at what it's telling you. ChatGPT conversations or LLM output, not just the translation, but, you know, to check that it's not hallucinating something silly. Like one of the first things Mo did was, you know, ask ChatGPT, tell us about financial text mining research that we worked on. And it created something completely random that we'd never written.
It showed me papers we never created, but so one more panel, and then I'll open to the floor. So Griff, the reason I asked you to join in is because I think we can use Welsh as a living example of like a lot of resources being created, but also like commercial tools, mobile applications. I know it cannot be quantified as in like how many extra speakers you have, but how did that help in terms of like, let's say, increasing the language use in like schools or like in houses, let's say Alexa, so you don't have to switch?
It has to be joined up, doesn't it? You can't just create a resource and then expect it to be discovered by everybody and used immediately. You have to push it into schools, and we've tried to market our resources. I think what's helped with the apps is that they've been installed as an image on iPads going out to schools. So the dictionary app that we have is on most iPads given out to school children in Welsh-speaking Welsh medium schools. I think we can do a little bit more to spider out from that. We should have adverts within the app, you know, for Maxen, for instance, and we haven't done that quite yet. But I think, to go back to one of your points, and it was something I tried to say this morning, it's really important for, as far as we can, to make sure these resources are available out of the box, and that people don't have to go and, you know, Welsh speakers, Irish speakers, or whatever, have to go and really search for the Welsh language pack for Windows, say. If we can ensure that it's a choice when you're installing Windows in the UK, I think, you know, that's just a small little pop-up. Yep. That's really important, and I think the Welsh government have done a lot to help normalise the use of Welsh and raise the expectation that, you know, Welsh is available as language of interfaces, of software as well. But basically, what I'm trying to say, it's more holistic than just creating the resources. There's a whole marketing and use of legislation that's there. You talked about that line in the Gaelic Act, respect. Yeah, equal respect. Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting because I think this morning, Katie, I don't know what it's called, the voice, the text-to-voice software for Gaelic existed, actually really, really good. And it was kind of promoted for a while, and everyone's kind of forgotten about it. And occasionally, I work for a website called Gaelic for Parents, and then occasionally I pop up and go, remember folks, if you don't know how to pronounce it, go and use this tool. And I've got, oh yeah, I forgot about that. You know, so and it's people have to kind of remember, and it's kind of sponsored by the Scottish Government, so everyone with a Scottish educational account can access it for free. But it's that sort of forgetting about promotion that I think sometimes we forget to push. We make it and go, here it is, off you go, use it, and then we forget that we have to kind of keep. Some people keep using it, but for other people, say, oh yeah, it's there, and then people forget about it. So there's a bit of a marketing campaign.
If it's not in Google, then
so that's the thing. So sometimes I think if there is no business use for it, it might not be like really well promoted. All right, this is really interesting. So, like, so there's mics. You can just circulate it between you. You already have the mic. So you win. Yeah, go ahead.
Some of the points you made are really interesting, and I should say this is sort of background to my PhD topic. So one of the points you made there, I think, comes back to a subjective decision where it's can you pronounce this word, or do you know how to pronounce it correctly? And from my experience, some teachers and learners will believe that they do, even if they don't. And the way I interpreted and worked on that was to develop some objective metrics for feedback when people are developing educational resources, essentially. Another reason behind that is just to tag on to what you were saying about people potentially being lazy, or how to phrase that correctly.
Yeah.
I think any of us who have young kids will know it's exhausting managing a group of 20 to 30 kids for a couple of hours in the day, and so it's tough then to go home and put your heart and soul into creating really inspiring materials and stuff like this. So as a result, breaking from the status quo that's in the textbooks is really challenging. And we've found that over time, the lessons don't change, or they're very slow to change. And so some of the metrics that I tried to develop, and some of them work better than others, was to align materials with a level of CA4. And now for that, then you need to be able to map them and this type of thing, but the end goal, whenever I find the time, I suppose, is that you can copy and paste a lesson into a text box and say evaluate or whatever, and it'll output a few different scores, similar maybe to free text, and it'll say this is, in terms of sentence length, most closely aligned to B1. In terms of grammatical features, it's most closely aligned to something else. And then the teacher can make a judgment based on their knowledge of their students and the intuitions that they've developed as professionals, whether that's appropriate or not. Because you'll know if you have a really good class that you can go slightly ahead in the curriculum because your class is really good and they need kind of more advanced stuff. And that's why I think the objective metrics as a feedback mechanism to help them break from the status quo, I think is a really important thing for us to develop. And linking it with CA4, with the grammar profile and the vocab profile, I think is a really good way of answering this question.
Thanks, Michael. Sorry. Yeah, there's a lot of questions. So
just a really quick thought in response to that. So when you were saying about what's the right way to pronounce something, or what's the right way to spell something, reminded me of what we found, Dawn, when we were first doing Corkenk and getting spoken language samples, and people were saying, don't record me, my Welsh isn't good enough. Okay, so you need to have that representation. That's one of the tricky messages to get across, that the corpus isn't always consistent, isn't always perfect, and that's a thing that learners and teachers can find in the corpus. So I think that's a tricky one to solve.
But I think we should sort of stick to objective things as much as we can and leave the subjective stuff in the back and sort of tell people, no, it's meant to be grey. It's meant to show them actually a bit more. And it's okay for it to be a bit fuzzy, the matching, or whatever.
It's actually quite sorry. It's quite interesting because tomorrow I'm meeting Claire now. She works at this university in a different department, and she looks at how people pronounce Gaelic, and she discovered there's this whole Glasgow Gaelic accent now. She does all fancy stuff with ultrasound and very different. And so I was kept very intrigued about this, so because it's changing. It's we're moving away from I know we had mid-Minch Gaelic earlier, and it's kind of this perfect Gaelic, and it's moving into sort of this. I like the grey areas of non-judgmental, accents.
Thank you. So Ruslan.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. I would like to respond to the comments that Paul and Inge made about using Google Translate or other large language models to translate. So I recently did experiments with several large language models to translate from English into Tamil. I was working with somebody from this part of India. And then later I made an experiment with another low resource language. So interestingly, for Tamil, it was neither Google Translate nor Microsoft Translator, nor DeepL delivered the best results. The best results were delivered not by ChatGPT, by BART. For Bulgarian, which is another low resource language, the best results were delivered by, there is a, I don't know whether you've heard about it, there is a new large language model called Claude 3. This is the one who recently knocked out ChatGPT from number one in the leaderboard. It came only a week ago. So Claude 3 now has the best performance. So I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe by the time we are able to translate into Gaelic or from Gaelic, there will be other large language models. So it's a little bit unpredictable. This is what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Ruslan.
I was just going to respond because I was quite excited by just even the thought about like using Irish language resources to potentially work towards Scottish Gaelic. I know that's because that's a huge potential for me to improve our database. I know that's maybe, it's beyond my level of expertise. I'm handing over to Dick. But that was to me quite an exciting thing to improve. I think the whole problem is like, what do you feed it? It's kind of rubbish in, rubbish out. And it's just not enough corpus available online to make that language model kind of accurate enough. So it just depends what it picks out, I suppose. My knowledge is not deep enough, so someone can kind of correct me. But it's kind of quite interesting how it also sort of the machine learning develops and takes it further. But
thank you.
Right, Gareth. I think if I start with easier and get harder, the easy one is language auto-detect. I want to be able to type in Word and it not to give me the squiggly lines. Mm-hmm. I don't want to have to tell it what language I speak because it should know what language I'm typing. The second one is safe spaces to increase the daily use of our languages. This is something we were talking about with the Irish-speaking community and Welsh. We're all worried about daily language use. It's a big worry as much as the number of speakers. So where are the places that people can speak with each other safely without being judged about speaking a dead language or something? And then the final one is a bit esoteric, but it's one for the academics in the room, which is at the moment we have to prompt AI with our needs in a text form, either speak it and it gets converted into text. In the future, there'll be more biometric, I'm thirsty, a robot will bring me a drink. Our intent will be unspoken. When we no longer have to voice our intent, what does that mean for our languages, our communities, and our cultures?
Thanks, Gareth. Ignatius.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. I think you took a lot of my ideas from my mouth. But I just want to say that beyond the technical needs, we need to be thinking about the core motivation behind us doing all this. Most of us are sitting here because we have a job working in language technology creation, right? But beyond that, just like Gareth was talking, there is a need for us to protect our cultural identities wherever we come from. And I'm speaking as someone who's been working in low-resource languages before getting into this. And it is very, very difficult to get people when they have alternative way of communicating. Right? As we are here now, everybody understands English, so English is very convenient. It's very difficult to get people to speak any other language. It's not in business. I mean, some governments are making enough effort to enforce using that in government policies and all that. In where I come from, for instance, English was the colonial language, but there are other 400 and something languages in the country. It does not make sense to encourage anybody to speak their local languages. So it doesn't matter how accurate the tools you create are and how much effort you put into that. He's only speaking it because of the passion to protect the language. It doesn't work for him in business, in school. How many of us teach physics or maths with Irish, Welsh, and all that in different schools? At the parliaments, do they speak that when they want to show that you're actually a very knowledgeable politician? You have to speak real good English, right? Not real good Welsh. So we have to also get governments involved in making sure that they enforce the use of these languages so that the tools we create will make sense. Otherwise, it will just be for fun.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Right, so I think we're going to move into the second question, just because of time. So, yeah,
I was
thank you
just
very
going to
much.
say, Gareth, come and speak to me about breathing spaces for
Yeah.
Gaelic, because that's my,
Yeah, so for the second one, I was thinking of Gareth, Merrin, and actually Ignatius. So would you like, please, to try and answer that? It'll be nice to have you there. Yeah, no pressure. Yeah, if you want to stay there, that's fine. But you, oh, sorry. Yeah, I can put the question. Yeah, so the reason I asked this question is, so was it in June last year? So Inga and I, we were in that summer school in Kosovo by Let Me, and then there was a big question about like ethical, like kind of like analyzing the language and stuff like that. So in some cases you don't want, and Paul Racing once mentioned that, like you don't want to go to a minority language, collect data and just say goodbye. And that was exactly what Paul said. So how can we make sure that, first of all, ethical consideration and language technology for minority languages can be balanced with culture preservation? Because you don't want just to create something and not worry about the culture. You want to make sure that whatever you're creating, and as Ignatius said a moment ago, is actually talks to your language as well in a kind of a digital world. Don't know if that...
Mihal, you said something quite nice earlier on that I noticed, which was we don't want people handing over stuff they don't understand. And I think maybe that speaks to the ethics there, is that I'd like people to make informed choices about when they sign a consent form before making an interview with a broadcaster or something like that. And then if that could be made in such a way that people can give their informed consent, then I think, now is a good line in the sand. From now on, why don't national broadcasters do what's in their interest, which is to promote the languages that they broadcast in, and make sure that there's enough training data for automatic speech recognition, and not let commercial pressures stop them releasing the data under an open license. That's what I feel.
Yeah, and I think I actually had an extra slide at the end of my presentation, which I didn't have time for, which sort of touched on this. I think one of my concerns from having looked at what is available online and the kind of spaces that people are using online to interact in these languages and to build these communities for themselves, all of these spaces are, or the vast majority of them, are based on these very centralized structures which are run by American corporations, and to me seem very unsustainable for these communities themselves. And I think, touching on this, one of the things that should be part of the remit, I suppose, is encouraging these communities and empowering them to think about who owns their data and what ownership they have over their data, and also how they can build their own platforms, which may be firstly more suitable for their needs, and secondly also will allow them to maintain that ownership. So I think that would be my main contribution on this subject.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was going to summarize it by saying that the more we involve the speaker communities, the better for us. At every stage of the development, from data collection to that. It's not uncommon to see things translated by a model and everybody shout about it and it's pulled out in adverts and all that. And that's because people are beginning to rely. Indeed, I was at the conference a few weeks ago, and somebody said, I'm going to download the entire Wikipedia now, because in the next 10 years, maybe, everything we're dealing with will be synthetic data, all right? And then we begin to value again the quality of human-produced data. And as you go down to the communities that actually speak these languages, you actually will be able to evaluate your models or your systems and see whether they're actually working as well as they're claiming to be working, beyond blue score, beyond any metric that will define in the development of these things. It's the speakers of this language that will understand what the metaphors are, what the proverbs are, what, the language as produced or generated by the technologies that we are marketing is as good as we are claiming that they are.
All right, go. floor. Questions? Yep. Let me just give you the mic.
So I guess it's just following on from most of what is said. I know it was mentioned at the end of Abigail's slides that one of the most important things that came from the Easter project, which is collecting publicly available bilingual language data, is being able to do outreach to the people you're going to, because in the end you are collecting data from people. It is publicly available, therefore the public is who it is catering to. Up until I was, well, as I'm transitioning into being a PhD student, I was the outreach assistant, and I still do most of the outreach assistant for Easter. And I've found it is an extremely important part of what we do. A lot of people, when you go into them, do not understand what it actually means to have language data, what their language data can do, what the words publicly available actually mean, and like how they can be used. And there's a lot of fear surrounding it, just because it is the unknown. And you hear, when you usually hear about language data, or you hear about someone's data being taken, it's usually like, they took it and they sold it to 8 different governments, and now I'm on 6 different hit lists. So being able to inform people about, this is what your language data is, this is what's publicly available, this is what's not, here's what it will do, here's what it can be contributed to, is really important. And one thing we've started doing a lot more is being able to go down into schools as well, and to be able to not only speak to students about things like, these are sort of what the resources are, how researchers work, how you can get into it, but also going through and being able to tell them, hey, this is what your language data is, this is how it is used, this is how things like ChatGPT, like any form of generative AI, works and what it's trained on. And I think getting to do more of that and more outreach in younger ages, along with people working in areas that will have a lot of language data, is really important, because it gives them a basis of understanding from like quite a young age the importance that their language data has, and it lets them make more informed decisions throughout their entire lives.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yep.
I do wonder sometimes if we're at risk of taking a kind of standard Western solution and assuming that that solution then can be taken to other continents, other language contexts, and just applied as, well, we need this, we need that, we need the other. And one of the things that kind of brought this home to me a few years ago was reading a paper about an Aboriginal Australian community, and one of the community's requirements was that data that was men's business and data that was women's business couldn't be held in the same database, which is so unusual from my personal perspective and different, and I don't have a cultural model in my head that relates to. And I think maybe sometimes we're at risk of taking this solution and just going, okay, it works here, so it'll work in New Zealand, it'll work in this country in Africa, it'll work with the Aboriginal Australians, and we're taking our model rather than working out what their model is, perhaps.
Thanks.
Yeah, really good point.
Comments from the panel on any of this?
I know you've worked in New Zealand, and I was thinking of the Maori communities and their attitude to data, not wanting it openly licensed because of the exploitation they've endured in the past. Yeah, really important point.
Cool. Thanks very much. That was good. So for the third questions, and no pressure, so I thought of like Dawn, Mihal, and Abigail. If you can please say again. You're working on Welsh. Thanks, Ignatius.
Yeah, it's all right, thank you.
Right. So the third question is about like the primary hurdle and challenges in developing language resources, and that's basically what you all talked about today. So it'll be really good to see like how collaboration could actually help us here. No one looked at the questions before. It's the same question. Did they change? Did I change? I copy-paste them. A little bit. Yeah, it's the same. No worries.
No, they didn't change. I'm trying to think of a way, because it overlaps with some of the previous questions and previous comments in terms of ethics, informed consent, and I think who are we collecting the data for? I mean, I think sometimes we can be a little overly worried with satisfying our funders and this type of thing, but really it's the community that we are funded to serve. Yeah, so that'd be one comment that I would make, certainly. I think
also, adding to that, there needs to be a purpose. Just because you can make something doesn't mean you should. And that's, well, it's true, isn't it? It's a waste of time and resources. And I think that's where the collaboration can come in, because it's a good bit of sense checking and finding out and actually talking to potential end users and people to find out what would be meaningful, what would be useful, what wouldn't be a waste of time and money.
I think, yeah, because this topic is inherently interdisciplinary, I think the solution needs to be as well. And so that you have computational expert and outreach expert or operative, or that you have people in the different roles who can effectively do their jobs and answer the community's different questions, or even different communities' different questions, just to make it plural. Yeah.
Can I pick up on that, actually? So that's quite an effective sort of, that's quite a nice response. An effective solution has to be interdisciplinary. So there is value in people beyond just NLP. Yeah. I'm just making sure that other institutions know that as well. So I know they're cutting linguistics.
Yeah, we're already talking to linguists.
Yeah, we've already talked about
we're good.
Just an example of, just to put a bit of meat on the bones there. So within Guish we had a thing called Bailifan Baila Disoran, and so it was a collection of stories from some islands off the west of Ireland. And when it was being launched, the launch happened on the islands. It didn't happen in a university in Dublin. And I think, like, sometimes we can forget that that's really important, because it's that's a good way to celebrate it for the community. It's a good event for the kids to see, you know what I mean, and to attend and that type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in on both of those comments. I think when I studied, my degree was in computer science, linguistics and language, and it was primarily a computer science degree. So it was kind of like computer science plus nearly, and that's very much, I think, how a lot of NLP is viewed. It's a computer science problem that we can solve computationally, but the problem isn't actually well defined in that space. The problem is better defined in the sociolinguistic space and in the cultural space and in the humanities and communication space. So I think it's very important for us to take a step back and realize, well, just because all of our NLP research is taking place in the computer science building doesn't mean that's actually where it belongs or where the domain and the experts need to be. And the more that we step now into this new age of general AI and less modular approaches to solving the problems, the more I think we have to realize that maybe we've misplaced this as a computer science problem somewhere along the way. Yeah.
Right, questions or comments?
I'm going to add another comment first. It's whose language is it anyway? So it's not data. It's not just data, is it? Language is more than that. So we have to always kind of come back to the kind of humanity of things. Again, advertising helps humanities.
Good one, yeah. Right, Paul, you've got the mic. Sure.
So I mean, I completely echo the comments on the panel about it. It needs to be interdisciplinary. You can't just sit in a computing department and do this stuff without ever talking to a linguist or somebody in the humanities. It's the approach that we've taken here with Roger and Jeff Leach in the research group across the two departments. I don't know when that started, 1970s? So if you don't do that, you just immediately fall down a hole of not understanding the language. in the way that you need to. But kind of a secondary hurdle I was going to mention was to make that interdisciplinary collaboration work, you need to be publishing in both areas. So it's no good being, the only computer scientist in the room, as I was at many ICAME conferences, where, you're in some cases paying tech support. That's not
whenever the presentation
where we need to stop. We need to also publish and solve the computer science problems as well as the linguistics.
Yeah. I think that will link quite well for the next question, and I already have people in mind. But yeah, I mean, it'll be like something related when we talk about like language models. Any more questions, or should we go to the next? Yeah, sure.
I guess it's a question. I was just wondering to what extent, I'm going to phrase it as a question. I was just wondering to what extent we see sustainability as being a key concern in terms of some of these resources. Because I can think of many resources, whether they're apps, websites, things that have been quite useful, but because of the way they were funded, then stopped. Just often very suddenly, the PhD was finished, so this great Twitter aggregator or whatever it was just isn't supported and doesn't work anymore. And whether the funding models perhaps are built to provide ongoing funding, or whether we're still in the world of a project that runs then stops and the people involved in it move on. Have we moved beyond that now? I get the sense we might have. Is that a true sense?
I think the impact agenda, which people might roll their eyes at, that institutions have with the ref and so on, I think that is actually sustainability. Quite a lot of impact is sustainability. So the funding has kind of changed a bit, and it's kind of it's badged itself as that for certain, all the institutional impact, IAA accounts and all that sort of stuff. I think that's about sustainability. So that, and if it's worth doing in the first place, then there's always ways of finding money.
I love this question because I think it relates to a principle I come back to all the time, which is learn from your history and go through your editing process and improve each time. And I think integration, like you've talked about, and a lot of people talk about, that's really important for addressing this. The other thing is we have to accept that a certain amount of it's going to be out of our control because of political cycles. So you'll have an officer or a politician who just gets it and will fund you because they get it, and then the next one try to get it but maybe won't as much or in as nuanced a way as the previous, and it's not a failing of theirs, it's just that they have a different experience or set of skills. So yeah, a certain amount of it we can control, a certain amount of it we can't, and to be aware of that and try to pass the torch on, leave good documentation, integrate.
There are some good models for sustaining things, like you have in Bangor, for example, and that's about track record as well, isn't it? So if you're asking the appropriate questions, collaborating with the right people, and producing the right sort of tools, then it kind of, that makes it, it keeps itself going, doesn't it, I guess, with a lot of hard work.
Thank you. But it's always precarious, though.
Yeah,
it's worry about that.
Yeah.
I think it's Dewi on the team has in the past said that software packages it's more like having a pony. You have the stage for all the person.
And expertise coming through as well.
Keep that pony alive, or else
And like your parents raise kids who will go into a similar industry and carry it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll have to think which my children now would be suitable for that.
Thanks. So now going to move to question 4. Thanks for the panel and everyone who asked. So I was thinking of David, Fernando, but Cedric is not here, so that was we need a third. So please, no pressure. Any volunteers? LLMs? We can have 2, but we'll see. All right, so the question is, it's a bit a long question, this one, but it says, how could the development of a Celtic language model contribute to language learning, linguistic research, and research development for the Celtic languages, and particularly trying to address the data scarcity, for example? And when I talk about like a language model, think about like how could it be used for such functions, for like think of like a tool like ChatGPT, how did it help with English? Did it help people learn it? Did it help second language learners? Things like that.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'll try. So my first thought was the resources that need to be built around for an LLM to happen at first place. So whenever an LLM exists, you need to test it, right? You need to have benchmarks that are properly made to make sure that the LLM is doing something correctly, whatever the use case is, right? So I think that's something that just the motivation of trying to develop an LLM for Celtic languages makes it happen, like these series of benchmarks that need to be developed, that need to be designed properly to know if the LLM is working. And those benchmarks are not just for the LLM, but also for side projects. And for example, I was working on this shared task on text simplification, and people wanted to use Welsh as well and involve Welsh data for that. And I was like, yeah, we don't have data for text simplification in Welsh. We don't have an LLM for Welsh to use as a baseline for that either. So, sorry, we cannot do that. So if we wanted to develop, there was a project to develop an LLM for Celtic languages in general, all the data sources would help, not just the LLM researching itself, but researching NLP in general, I think.
I think that fits nicely with what I wanted to say. So I think the way that like a Celtic large language model would feed into like issues of data scarcity is not by actually solving the underlying problem, right, the lack of data, but by providing a sort of way into the backing data for large language models in other languages. So what do I mean by that? One example, I was recently speaking with some researchers who have been working on developing large language models for Galician, so language spoken in northern Spain, which has a lot of similarities to Portuguese and Spanish. And in the course of developing these models, there's not enough data on its own to develop a large language model for Galician, but by developing models that are grounded in Portuguese and Spanish and maybe even English, and then fine-tuning on their data for the target language, they're then able to get an interface that can provide sort of reasonable answers if you're trying to use it in a sort of chatbot style like ChatGPT interface in something resembling Galician. So one of the things that they were sharing with me, I believe this is ongoing work at the moment, was that it's that of the two models they developed, one did a better job of producing the correct form of the language, right? So actually producing sort of valid Galician that people would recognize. And then the other did a better job of leveraging the sort of semantic backing from other languages in order to provide coherent answers to questions. So it might have been the kind of answer that someone would, produce if they had a dictionary and were trying to give you an answer in a language that they don't speak properly, right? So the answer, the backing data might be very good, but the actual text wouldn't be as good. So I think there's something there in terms of the way we do fine-tuning and transfer learning, where we can, we're not going to have something the size of English language Wikipedia in Scottish Gaelic, but we might be able to leverage data for other languages when answering queries in these languages. Yeah, that was one of the thoughts that I had. And then more generally, yeah, I think relating to what Fernando was saying about looking to, developing a multilingual large language model where you have maybe a variety of languages, but in particular, good representation from the Celtic language family, and then maybe fine-tuning on your target language, that these models can then provide sort of the foundation models for other applications, right? So you can then apply these to improve your part-of-speech taggers or your parsers or your speech recognition tools. And so I think that's where the sort of gains from this sort of modern architecture and approach around LLMs can come for the community.
Thank you. Right. Is there a mic there? Yeah.
So I love that you're talking about benchmarking, because I think 100% that's one of the biggest things that the Celtic LLMs can contribute to each of the languages. But then I'd also just add to that that if we take a step back and acknowledge that we're in the early stages of the development of a technology, I think if we look at phones and laptops and cars and airplanes, it's always like bigger, bigger, bigger at the early stages of new technology's development. And then when benchmarks are found and efficiencies are worked out and things like this, we find that the kind of Goldilocks zone, even though it then is what is the thing that remains. And I think, or I hope, that at some stage when we've figured out, you know, how big is big enough for LLMs because we've improved fine-tuning, or because we've improved the architecture or changed the architecture in some way, or let's say we train slightly differently for more parameters just to improve the output instead of going bigger with the data or something like this, then we might be able to use a representative but smaller corpus to train these and beat the benchmarks that have been set by these Celtic language models. And that would be my hope for this type of thing. Yes.
Ignatius? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that ties in well with what I was going to suggest. I will always want us to come back a little bit to ask ourselves, why are we doing this? Because the thing is, we have LLMs today, and everybody's trying to go down the route of building LLMs for every language. I mean, Kevin told us that we will never get enough data for LLMs, and was suggesting looking for some sort of text augmentation and all that, which is going back to synthetic data, which is not human, right? Can we always ask ourselves, what do we want to do? If we want to do translation, for instance, we don't have LLM for language A. How else can we do translation? Is there any other method that will work, even if we don't have LLM? Basically because that language is not suited for LLM. LLM defines what's required. You know, you have to have a large amount of data, a large amount of compute. And the more you drag smaller languages onto trying to be LLM-worthy languages, the more you marginalize them, the more you make the researchers struggle, the more you, because even funding is not available for these languages. There are just few individual researchers who are trying to say, okay, we're going to bring this in. We're going to bring it in. If you look at OpenAI's Whisper chart on the languages that it supports, you know, it tapers as it goes down. Because actually it's listing a lot of languages. It can somehow say, I've seen this language before. What's the performance on that language? Almost nothing. It just has seen it. And majority of the world's 7,000 languages are not there. So, but before LLMs, before 2013 embedding models, for instance, we were doing NLP 50 years ago. And there are techniques that can actually effectively work with these things and give us something useful. Maybe we'll go to that. And there are resource lights for researchers.
Thanks, Ignatius. Right. Panel?
Just to add something on there, I think one of the common themes there is that's really highlighted is not, like this question in particular is about LLMs, right? Although also note that the text says language model and the parentheses say LLM. And there are other kinds of language models as well. And in fact, there are things that don't get called language models that are in fact models of language, right? but I think there's potentially also an opportunity to reignite collaborations between the sort of NLP community, which is now kind of further from the computational linguistics and the rest of the linguistics community than it used to be, I think, and reconnect with cognitive scientists and psycholinguists. And, you know, children learn language from far, far less data than any of these large language models use. And they might have, you know, other sensory inputs that augment that linguistic data, but we should be able to do better than this. Just sort of, we have a proof of concept that it's possible to learn language from less data. So I think there's interesting space for collaborations there as well to see how do we do this in a data efficient way. What can we learn from the latest cognitive science as well? And how will language models in the future develop beyond just data-hungry large language models, but towards more nuanced or modular models?
Thanks. Fantastic, actually. Yeah. Thank you very much. All right. On to our final question, which I'm gonna. Oh, it's not moving. Okay, so I have to read this because online speakers apparently can't see now the slides. So this says, how can digital platforms like TikTok be utilized to promote Celtic languages, considering linguistics diversity, educational implications, and technological advancements? So I was thinking of Daniel. Yeah. No one else. Yeah, I tried. I was thinking actually of Daniel, Inge, and Gareth, but I wonder if Gareth, are you gonna catch a taxi or something?
Catch a train, but I don't mind coming on.
Yes, please. Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, right.
This is more important.
Yeah. So you have the answers.
Oh, me? Oh, really? Every other one started at the other end.
I know.
That's why I sat here. Okay, so my first thought on looking at this is to feel suspicious about the question. When we're talking about TikTok being utilized, my first thought is by whom? So are we thinking bottom up from just the average people on the street, young people on the street who are using TikTok? Are we thinking about top-down government interventions? Are we thinking about interventions by language activists? It could be a whole lot of different things going on here. And I think it might depend on which Celtic language we were talking about as to which one of those approaches may or may not make sense. If we were thinking about Welsh, my advice would be something along the lines of don't even touch it. Just let it do its thing. It's there, it's vibrant. People are producing materials without any intervention, any encouragement, any badging, any official support. It's organic and it's lovely. But that may not be the case in, for instance, Cornish. Yeah, it may be that if you want to have something starting, I don't know, I haven't looked to see if there's any or much Cornish on TikTok, then again, ideally what you want is you want the people doing it themselves. But how might you make that happen? We were talking earlier about the idea of permissive environments, okay? The idea that you feel comfortable that this is a space where you can use your minority language. So maybe a top-down role might be for those smaller user communities to demonstrate that TikTok is a permissive environment in which you can use Cornish or whatever other language we might be talking about. In order to make that sort of thing happen, the language needs to be visible. Yeah, these speakers need to see that their language is being used. They need to be able to find that content. So whether there are ways you can push that content towards them, they might need a degree of digital literacy. Okay, if they don't actually know how to use TikTok, or how all young people know how to do this, let's be honest. But they do need that basic digital literacy. And so we might look at doing things if we were doing top-down, maybe getting a celebrity or an influencer, in a very careful, light way. Yeah, you don't want sort of the Welsh Language Commissioner going, here is the official Welsh language TikTok account you've all got to look at. Yeah, you need something subtle and engaging because we're aiming at young people. You might do something with schools. Yeah, going into schools, getting the kids in classes to produce TikTok videos, maybe music videos, playing their own music, creating their own songs. Maybe something like that will be the seeds then around which, if you like, the pearls will then be created. The other thing that came into my mind is in the Catalan papers that I mentioned, one of the things they talk about and look at was the kind of creation of a standard hashtag for tagging Catalan content on TikTok. Again, it wasn't a top-down thing, it was a bottom-up thing, but there was kind of a campaign to standardize the use of a particular hashtag to make that content more findable. The only other thing I'd add, finally, is if we actually understood better the algorithms that are being used to recommend to people's For You page. I've watched this, I've liked it. Okay, what characteristics does TikTok look at then in order to bring you another video that you might like? If we understood some of that, then we could maybe looking at kind of gaming the algorithm in order to design our content. So if you'd looked at one Welsh language TikTok, you were more likely then to be fed more Welsh language TikToks.
I think it's what Daniel said. No, but one of the things I was going to say, nothing... I was a teacher before I went to the dark side of social linguistics, and one of the things that is a surefire way to make sure young people don't use a tool is by an official organization to promote it. It is this, we've all been teenagers, some of us are still kind of in a teenager stage, but, and I think this is going to be an important thing is, nothing ruins a social media platform as being made to use it, because it's really only fun if it's slightly edgy and you're doing it because you said about like a 12-year-old, if you're allowed to use it, it's really no fun. And I think this is for Gaelic, TikTok. I'm going to have to look into this now, but where it's organic as it's most successful. Mm-hmm. So the Gaelic Language Board tried to have their own. They denied that it was meant to be a Facebook page lookalike, but it was a Facebook rip-off lookalike, and it was a disaster because it was something people felt they had to use it, singled them out. It wasn't organic, and whereas people have built their own sort of communities, and that's where I think social media platforms like TikTok, where no one forces you, but I kind of would agree where we want maybe some input from higher up is, can we force the algorithm towards more Gaelic content? Can we, localize it a bit, that people get fed, have the option of Gaelic content, even if they haven't engaged with this, because you then only have to watch a couple of videos, I think, and then you will get some more. So that's where the role for, government officials lie. But yeah, as if I could see Bord na Gaelic making a TikTok video, that will not be the thing that young people like. By default, it's just not cool. So I'll hand over to you, Gareth, before.
I know first-person storytelling works because that was what I worked in before language technology. I was in a project with the BBC called Capture Wales, and that was about people telling true stories from their own lives and sharing them in the days before YouTube. But there's someone in this room who will understand TikTok a lot better than me. Tom Apdan is a well-known Welsh rapper. He works up in Bangor. Tom, you sort of headlining the Eisteddfod this year with Tri Hwrdoedd. How do you promote your music on these social media platforms, and what lessons can our languages learn from the way you promote music? Microphone.
Yeah. Oh, sure, it's fun.
Like Inga said, to be cool, you don't want to be mum and dad, basically. You have to try and be edgy and, just not make it feel like a school day. Yeah. I mean, in my other life, I was a school teacher before a rapper as well. I had the same experience as you, where the way that I'll give you an anecdote, okay? The way that I made one class understand ratios in maths was by saying, okay, you've all robbed a bank, now split the money equally between you. And they loved it, yeah? Because they're all, you know, they're all bad boys now. And it's like, oh yeah, we're bad boys, let's do the maths. And it works. But that is just the lesson that you need to take home, is like, yeah, don't try and be cool as well. Yeah, the kids will decide what's cool and they'll use it. I think a gentle touch is what's needed, basically, and a push in the right direction.
And I think very important, it's take the focus away from the language almost. It's not like you must use. It's like, it's great if you do, but also like it shouldn't have to be about Gaelic necessarily. It needs to be about something that interests. If it's music, if it's something else, cooking, or you know, one of these things that takes almost the focus. The language is the vehicle, you know. It's you know, it's the sea through which, you know, we swim, rather than it's all about like, oh, it's Gaelic learning, it's about Gaelic. That is the focus. It's almost something else is the focus, and it happens to be in Gaelic. So one example, is I do karate through the medium of Gaelic, and it's online as well. So let's go. But it happens to be karate. And it's Gaelic, so the Gaelic is almost like by stealth, and that works really well because it takes it away from like, oh, you must use Gaelic, and then if you use an English word, it's not great. So it's just by stealth, like find something, and then the language becomes incidental almost, and it's great when that happens and happens naturally, and I think it allows people, you know, to not teach a thing like you made a grammatical error there on the third line of your, you know, of your thing. That kind of helps. I think that sort of permissiveness and that playing with language, and not sort of us as adults think they're going, there's a mistake, you know, error in your pronunciation. That really, I think, helps. Just by stealth is, I think, the answer.
Thank you. Questions from? Can I just show you? Yeah, sorry, this is more a point about digital platforms than promotion, but what we found really useful for us was podcasts. There was a paper by Spotify recently that came out saying that Welsh was the 10th most featured language, spoken language in podcasts on Spotify, above Danish and Finnish, and that amazed us. And podcasts are really easy to produce, and as you were just saying about cookery, you can have two people that speak a minority language just discuss cookery, and you know, that's, in a way, that's promotion as well. But one of the things Sian's been doing for us is getting in touch with amateur producers of podcasts and asking them to license the podcast for us to be transcribing and segmenting and releasing that data in the CC0 public domain. As training data, and everybody's been really, really keen to help, because it kind of helps them create transcriptions as well of their podcasts that can be picked up by Google, and it lets us get hold of data that isn't translationese and official text off the web. When we transcribe, and in the future auto-transcribe with the speech recognition models, we get into spheres like cookery, for instance, that aren't as well represented in web texts. So podcasts, I think, are really important.
Yeah, more of a point I can speak to, like from personal experience, to the points that Daniel made there. One being, I think it was now 2 years ago, Paul Mescal was on some random red carpet, and he just happened to speak about Irish, and in Irish it's like maybe 3 words, but that overtook Irish social media and Irish news for about a month. But one of my best friends, she is an Irish teacher in a secondary school, and for that whole month there were kids talking about it, and they're like, oh my god, this is great. They're in her Irish classes like, miss, did you hear Paul Mescal talking? So the incorporation of celebrities, and sort of, not even like, they don't need to be the world's biggest. I guess Paul Mescal is more prominent now, but at the time he had been only in normal people. effectively will help in the case of younger people. And then myself and the same Irish teacher, as it happens, both worked for what is essentially a full immersion Irish language summer camp. They're in Gaeltacht areas. It's called Closh Lurgan, and it is notable quite around the country and outside of Ireland because they make Irish language music videos. They will translate.
Yeah, those are really good.
They translate pop songs.
Yeah.
The man in charge is one of my friend's fathers. He does not really care about pop music, but he cares very, very dearly about the Irish language. And he essentially learned that, if you let kids do what they like to do, but it just so happens to be in Irish, they will like it a whole great deal. The kids don't actually care very much about Irish at all, is what I've learned from working about them. But they care deeply about getting to dance around and sing a big music video and get all the flashing lights and get to do things. And it has led to all of those kids actively using Irish and speaking it, but also the content that is created creates excitement and creates notoriety throughout the world. The fact that I said this, none of you speak Irish, but you know who I'm talking about in itself. So these are things that I can actually attest are indeed very helpful when it comes to promoting digital platforms and utilising them.
Thank you. Just to come back on that, the video in the corpus that had the highest number of views, so it had 6 million views, was a video associated with the television programme Welcome to Wrexham, which, for those people who don't know, Wrexham Football Club was bought by Ryan Reynolds and the other guy who nobody can ever remember his name, McElhenney, thank you very much. And the video is them learning some Welsh, but actually the Welsh teacher is in Welsh saying, oh, what a strange thing to do for your midlife crisis. Instead of buying a sports car, you bought a football club. But that programme and the fact that those two Hollywood stars have been seen speaking Welsh, have done videos where they speak Welsh, have used Welsh at the Oscars ceremony, has been massive. Yeah, it's been absolutely huge. So again, it's that thing of, oh my goodness, so-and-so just spoke Welsh, particularly when it's someone you wouldn't expect. It's a star, and it's someone who isn't even from Wales. They're making an effort to learn the language because they see a value in it, and I think that's very powerful as well.
Government should fund non-national famous people to
to speak. They only need to say a few words.
They don't need the money.
So, any more or final questions? I think that takes us to the end of our workshop. So, thanks a lot to everyone for coming, for presenting, for participating in the panel talks, and for having cakes.
Always happy to have cakes.
So I really enjoyed this. I'm sure a lot of you as well. I learned a lot coming from the computing background. Although I've worked with linguists, that today as well there were more about the ethical, and then the usage of the language and things like that. So that was really enlightening for me. I will later send an email with all the resources that we formed together today. So feel free, please, to add in more stuff. As much as we can. Yeah.
I just want us all to give Mo a round of applause for organizing today, because this was really great. Thank you.
Dawn was going to do the same thing, but I have two other points. One, we should also thank John very much for all of the technical support. And a final question, are we going to do a group photo?
Yeah, that would be lovely. Yeah, that'd be nice.
So you've got the best phone camera, probably?
That was 2 years ago.
Okay.
Okay, I'll try. You're not thinking of a selfie, just kind of give it
Should we come round?
Yeah. You've destroyed one of my mics. Yeah, it's dead. It's totally dead.
Test.
It's back. I'm just going to say thank you.
phone upon one of these or something, and then we can all get in.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to the online users and SAD as well. And as I said, there is the resources that we formed in the spreadsheet. If you have anything else to add, please do. Thank you very much. I think we don't have to.
Okay, thank you, folks. I'll finish off on here. Thank you for hanging around all the way to the end. We'll sort out a way for the recordings to be accessible afterwards. And yeah, thank you very much.